Babies for sale. Chinese authorities bust a number of child trafficking rings and rescue many abducted children. But just what fuels the child abduction phenomenon in China, and what can they do to fight it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. Chinese authorities have rescued 89 children in a nationwide crackdown on trafficking gangs. Child trafficking is widespread in China, many say because of the country's one-child policy and demand it creates to have sons. Rights groups say authorities have failed to stamp out the practice because of local officials and police officers are often complicit in the trade. Gerald Tan has more.
The operation begins at nightfall. The police officers are briefed on the suspects. Just before entering the building, the leader reminds his team, protect the infants first. The raid is swift, and within minutes, a kidnapped baby is found. In just 1 week, China's Ministry of Public Security has rescued dozens of children in a 9-province-wide bust.
The goal of this operation is to rescue all the abducted children, seize all suspects involved and smash the criminal network.
The government estimates there are around 30 to 60,000 cases of child abductions in China each year. They're often sold into slave labor or forced to become beggars. Demand is also high from childless couples.
The price of a kidnapped baby can vary greatly. Girls start at about $3,000 but because of a traditional preference for sons in China, a baby boy can fetch between $10,000 and $14,000. This in a country where the average annual salary is just under $6,500.
Part of the problem, though, are China's existing laws. Although traffickers can face the death penalty, child buyers are currently not prosecuted if they do not obstruct the rescue operation or mistreat the children.
Next, we will cooperate with relevant agencies to strengthen the penalty for those who buy abducted children, so as to decrease the demand, which may lead to child trafficking.
Only a tiny fraction of abducted children in China are ever found and reunited with their families. The tragedy of a thriving market where babies are for sale. Gerald Tan, Al Jazeera.
So what can the Chinese government do to stop child trafficking? Well, to help us answer this question and a whole lot more, we hope, we're joined by our guests in Beijing. Dale Rutstein from UNICEF, the UN Child Protection Agency. He is their spokesperson for China. From Hong Kong, we have Andrew Leung, a Chinese political analyst and economist. And also joining us from Beijing, Victor Gao, director of the China National Association of International Studies, a think tank affiliated with the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you all for being with us, gentlemen. Dale Rutstein, if I could start with you. What is the extent of this problem in China?
Well, the latest year for which we have official data is 2010, and in the Ministry of Public Security keeps statistics on trafficking cases involving women and children. There are about 5,000 cases recorded in 2010. About 2,000 of those are cases of child trafficking. The rest are cases of women being trafficked. But these numbers represent only those cases that come to the attention of the authorities. In other words, the ones that the police come to be aware of and get involved in. The real number is probably much larger, but we just don't know.
So pretty widespread problem then, it sounds like you're saying. Where do these abductions typically occur and under what circumstances?
Well, actually, again, the official numbers are small, and when you look at the size of China, for instance, this recent crackdown, there were 89 children rescued, and about 300 traffickers were arrested. That's actually a very small number, considering the scope of the problem in neighboring countries, like the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos. The real issue for China is the difficulties of the extremes of poverty and wealth. trafficking of children is very much associated with poverty, and because of the migrant population, very large numbers of people who are leaving rural areas and looking for opportunities in the urban areas. This affects both adults, young people, and at times children. So there's an enormous pull to leave home and find work. So there is during this period of China's growth, there is a significant trafficking problem, but the numbers are actually quite small.
Andrew Leung, this particular raid that's been in the news in China, is this the tip of the iceberg for you as far as this problem?
Well, of course, China is a big country, and the numbers do not tell the full story. But I think that the trend, rather than being on the upside, it could be on the downside, because as far as poverty is concerned, China's economy has been doing remarkably well during the past 10 years. And then, of course, with rising income, and also with the policy to balance the economic development, there are more job opportunities in the inner provinces, and that tends to reduce the amount of migration of the labor. And we're already seeing that some provinces along the coast find difficult to recruit migrant labor. So that would help to reduce the numbers. But I think it's apart from the question of poverty, there's also the question of the one-child policy, which has led to a sexual imbalance in the population. And young men, especially at a marriageable age, are finding it more and more difficult to find appropriate spouse. And then there has been a tendency to import so-called brides, from other countries. So that's another question, this one-child policy. The third one is, of course, China is now turning itself into a kind of transit center for the neighboring countries. My colleague was referring to countries, backward countries like Laos, certain extent, certain parts of Vietnam and Myanmar and so on and so forth. And so, and that seems to be China is turning itself into a transit center. So part of the numbers, in fact, reflect on the kind of child trafficking of non-Chinese nationals.
Right.
So I think that these three factors add together.
Absolutely, and I want to talk a little bit more
phenomenon.
about the underlying causes of this a little bit later. But Victor Gao, to what extent are the Chinese authorities on top of this problem? I mean, we saw the footage of the police banging down the doors, raiding these places, but to the cynics out there, it all looks a little bit self-serving, doesn't it? I mean, this is obviously a headline grabbing piece of news, these busts, and it certainly gives the appearance, at least, that the authorities have got a handle on this problem. But have they really?
No, I think a couple of points. One is that the government's official number of abducted children is much smaller than the missing children number. As a matter of fact, many missing children eventually can be proven to be abducted and trafficked and eventually sold to other buyers in different parts of China. Therefore, I think we need to look at both the official number of abducted children as well as the missing children. Now, this problem is particularly difficult and complicated in China. First of all, the country is very big, and there is no internal barrier for the movement of people from one place to another inside China. Secondly, for children, especially infants, they can actually travel without any documents or ID card if they are accompanied by an adult. And in many cases, the so-called adult is the person responsible for the adoption or involved in the illegal trafficking of the children. Therefore, it is very, very difficult to prove that the adult is not having the right custody of the child, because the child has no way of telling the law enforcement people their own circumstances, because simply they are too young. Now, on the government side, the law enforcement agencies also need to face the problem of how to allocate their resources. In China, you also have all kinds of crimes, murder, rape, and also more serious felonies, etc. So in a sense, compared with other categories of serious crimes, missing children is a serious problem, but in many cases, local law enforcement agencies do not deal with such cases with the top priority and urgency. I think Chinese government need to elevate this to a much higher level of attention.
And when it emerges that some of those involved in these abductions are in fact public officials themselves, that can't be reassuring for the Chinese public, can it?
Well, I think the missing children or the abducted children cases are a serious problem in China. However, they are all case by case. It's a huge tragedy for the families involved, especially for the parents who have lost their children and who find extremely difficult to trace where their children are. So I think it's a human tragedy. However, I would say proving such cases is also difficult because in China, many cases, they simply move children from one province to another province, across many provinces sometimes. Therefore, in terms of law enforcement agencies, mostly they operate within one province. Moving across provinces for the law enforcement agencies is actually more difficult than if they need to operate within one province. This also adds to it, and corruption definitely is also involved. However, I would say that the problem in China for missing children or abduction of children is probably much less serious compared with many other countries. Having said that, I think we shall be no complacent about this, and we shall really deal with this as a top-level priority for the law enforcement
Indeed.
agencies.
Let's talk a little bit more now about what is fueling the trade of trafficked children in China. Many Chinese people are unable to conceive a child of their own and buy one as a form of illegal adoption. Some experts say kidnapping has increased because of the price paid for adoptions by foreigners. And some parents also use trafficked children to have another son or daughter illegally. That's a way of getting around China's decades-old one-child policy, which started back in 1979. The Chinese preference for a son and a male heir as well is another factor. And some children are abducted and then sold as slaves or forced into working in sweatshops. And though boys are the main victims of child abduction, girls can sometimes be sold as wives. In some parts of rural China, buying a wife is not seen as a crime, but as part of Chinese tradition. So a number of cultural and economic factors in play there, Dale Rutstein. But what do you think are among the biggest causes of this problem?
Well, of course, China is going through immense change. As was mentioned before, the extremes of the great disparities between poverty and wealth in China are really at the heart of this. The cultural factors are very, very powerful. The sex ratio at birth in China is now about 118 boys for every 100 girls born. This does reflect a very strong preference for a male child. There's a lot of issues that play into that. A son is your inheritance, is the traditional source of protection in old age. And until China's social protection policies and allowances and procedures, the social safety net is really strong enough to build confidence for people's old age. In rural parts of China, there is this very strong pull to have a son. Mind you, there are many other Asian countries where the sex ratio at birth is also quite distorted in favor of boys, where with different family planning policies. So it's hard. Probably the one-child policy plays a role in this, of course, but it's hard to really pin down exactly how much of a role that plays.
Sure, let's put some of that to Victor Gao. I mean, this idea of wanting to have a son and a male heir in the family is not obviously something that's individual to just China. It's something that's prevalent in a number of countries in the world. But why is it such an acute problem in China? Is it because of the one-child policy? I mean, how is that connected to it?
No, actually, I don't think this problem has a serious connection with the one-child policy. I would say several reasons actually can explain why this is a problem in China. One is that the official adoption policy in China is very complicated. If you need to adopt a child through legal means, it's very complicated. Red tape is very heavy. Bureaucracy is very much of a problem. So many couples actually choose to go get around the official adoption process. This is one reason. Now, secondly, I would say infertility rate among married couples in some parts of China is especially high, and the couples who would prefer to have a child, if they cannot produce one child, need to either adopt a child through legal means, or sometimes they are forced to the extremes and they go to the gray market or the black market, and sometimes they encounter such criminals who would abduct children and sell some of the children to them. So I would say infertility plus the difficult child adoption process has a lot to explain for this problem. Now, the other thing is that in China, you have great economic disparity between one part of China versus another part of China. Therefore, it is very common for these abducted children problems to occur in one part of China, and then they would move the children to another part of China where there is either a shortage of children, especially boys, or there is a shortage of females eventually who will reach marriageable age, so that even young girls will be sold to couples in the remote regions, so that eventually they will grow up and marry the sons in the immediate family or in the neighboring families. So I think this problem is very much economic. Now, one-child policy has been criticized and has always been controversial in China. On the other hand, I think China has claimed that it benefited a great deal because the Chinese population probably would have been about
I want to put your point about
more
the growing gap between rich and poor, Victor Gao. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to put that point about growing gap between rich and poor in China to Andrew Leung, if I may, and ask you to what extent you think that is a factor. Obviously, China has gone through a lot of big changes economically over the last few years. How does that play into all of this?
Well, I think the situation is changing quite rapidly as a result of even the last 5-year plan, and particularly the 12th five-year plan, trying to rebalance the economy towards over-dependence on exports and growing the kind of urban areas in the inner provinces. So we're seeing that a lot of new cities or medium from towns, from small towns to small cities, from small cities to bigger cities, and a lot of this urban development is taking place in the inner provinces. So what used to be poor and backward villages are growing up to be urban areas, and that will serve to stabilize the population in the local areas. For example, in Chengdu and Chongqing, the policy has been to grow the kind of urban areas around the villages, so that they do not have to leave their own hometown, and this is being consolidated in the latest 12th five-year plan. So I think the things are changing. As for the one-child policy, though, don't forget there are various exemptions. For example, definitely the minorities are totally exempt from the one-child policy, but also for those who can afford it, they can just pay a non-criminal fine. But it's absolutely correct to say that in the villages who cannot afford such a heavy fine, they will resort to even kind of importing children from other areas. I think what the challenge for the Chinese government is to have a central policy coordinated in Beijing, for example.
Let's talk a bit more then.
So as to manage the kind of cross-provincial
what can
kind
be
of
done
trafficking
to combat this problem then, or what is being done. And if I could turn back to you on this, Victor Gao, child buyers, the buyers of these abducted children in China are not subject to criminal prosecution at the moment, and legal experts that are pushing for a revision of this law to make it a crime to actually buy abducted children say that is a major, that is something that has to be addressed. Why hasn't that happened?
Well, I think in many cases, those couples who buy a child probably honestly believe that those who want to sell the child to them are the real parents of the child, mainly because the sellers actually would, in many cases, hold themselves out as the parents of the child, and they will claim poverty or other excuses for their decision to sell the child for a profit. And therefore, the buyers in that case, who probably have experienced a lot of difficulty in legal adoption of a child, acted in many cases out of honesty that the child belonged to the seller. So this explains part of the problem. Now, secondly, even if some of these buyers believe that the child is actually abducted, they do not want to make a big noise out of that. They want to just do it in a very secret manner, partially because they also hope that the child, when they grow up, will not know that they have this particular origin, and they do not know the circumstances for why they become the son or the daughter of the adopted family. So they want to bury the history of this whole thing, and they do not have any incentive to make it public. They want to do it in a very secret and very hush-hush manner. This explains why, in many cases, they become accomplice to this heinous crime of child abduction and child trafficking. And I think education needs to be enhanced so that people in China will know that it is actually a criminal offense if they become accomplice
Dale
to
Rutstein,
such
when you hear of
child
parents trying to do
abduction and
this
child trafficking.
on their own, rather than looking to the government for help, what does that tell you about when they try to take matters into their own hands in trying to find their children? First of all, how successful are they in doing that?
Well, I don't really have a lot of information about these groups that are looking to identify and go out and find these children. There are groups that are putting pictures of children online. They are networking and trying to spread information. Like in the West, we've seen pictures of children on milk cartons for decades now.
Yeah, let me put it another way. What does it tell you then? What does it tell you then about the lack of help that they're getting from the government on this, if they are going to these measures?
Well, okay. There are many things that need to be strengthened. First of all, law enforcement needs to be strengthened. Victims' assistance needs to be strengthened. Obviously, poverty alleviation we've talked about. But over and above that, I think the most important trend going on right now is beginning efforts in China through the Ministry of Civil Affairs to develop a comprehensive child welfare program or system. Currently, there really is no distinct child welfare program in China, and this is being developed. UNICEF is working to support this kind of thing. And what this means is that building up and professionalizing the social work profession in China. This is still in the very early stages, and the idea, the plans, the goal is to establish, to vastly increase the number of professional social workers so that at the community level there's case management of those families that are in the most desperate situation. Look, child abduction, child trafficking, this usually prospers in places where there's desperation, in places where children are not being cared for effectively, let's say where parents are migrant workers or itinerant workers, or where there are social problems within the family. Trafficking and abduction is drawn to those areas where it's very easy to separate a child from his or her parents. And so all the kinds of social programs that are necessary to deal with that.
That is going to have to be the last word, unfortunately. We've got to leave it there. I want to thank all three of our guests from Beijing, Dale Rutstein, also from Beijing, Victor Gao, and from Hong Kong, Andrew Leung. Thanks very much for your time. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we want you to send us your feedback. Just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Hazem Seeker. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.